When the ship Aurora Borealis got trapped in ice, the crew discovered what was hidden below. You stand on the frozen deck, your breath forming thick clouds in the Arctic air, and you feel the stillness of the ship beneath your feet. A stillness that speaks not of rest, but of captivity. The ice has claimed your vessel, wrapping around the hull in a grip that tightens with each passing hour. You are the navigator aboard this whaling ship, and you carry the weight of a truth that settles heavy in your chest. The Aurora Borealis will not move again until spring, if she moves at all. The year is 1868, deep winter in the far north, and you and 17 other souls must now face months trapped in a frozen world that shows no mercy to the unprepared. Your name is James, and you have sailed northern waters for 12 years, long enough to read the ice the way farmers read clouds before harvest. You knew 3 days ago, when the grinding and groaning beneath the hull grew constant, that escape was no longer possible. The captain, a stern man named William, refused to accept this truth until yesterday morning, when the last open water disappeared and the ship settled into the ice with a sigh that seemed almost human. Now the Aurora Borealis sits locked in place, tilted slightly to starboard, surrounded by an endless expanse of white that stretches to every horizon. The crew gathers on deck for the captain's address. 18 men wrapped in wool and fur, their faces already showing the pinched look that comes from insufficient food and constant cold. You stand near the rail, your mittened hands gripping the frozen wood, and you watch as William climbs to the raised quarterdeck. His breath rises in clouds as he speaks, his voice carrying clearly in the cold, still air. "We are trapped," he states simply, without preamble or false comfort. "The ice will hold us until spring thaw, perhaps 4 months from now. Our supplies are adequate if we ration carefully. Our shelter is sound if we maintain it properly. We will survive through discipline, cooperation, and careful management of resources." His words are met with silence. The crew already knew their situation, but hearing it stated so plainly transforms abstract fear into concrete reality. You see shoulders slump, faces turn downward, hope draining like water through cupped hands. Then Robert, the ship's carpenter, speaks up from near the mainmast. "What do we do about the cold below deck? The sleeping quarters froze solid last night. We cannot survive 4 months in such conditions." William nods, acknowledging the concern. "We will reorganize living spaces, consolidating into the smallest defensible area. We will insulate with spare sail canvas. We will adapt, as sailors have always adapted." But you know, and you suspect William knows, that adaptation may not be enough. The ship was designed for sailing, not for serving as a winter shelter in Arctic ice. The spaces below deck, adequate for sleeping between watches during active sailing, become death traps when temperatures drop to the extremes you now face. You need better shelter, warmer quarters, something the ship cannot provide. As the meeting disperses, you approach William privately. He stands alone at the rail, staring out at the ice, and you see weariness in the set of his shoulders. You speak quietly, for his ears only. "The ship will not keep us alive through winter. Below deck is too cold, even consolidated and insulated. We need to find alternative shelter." William turns to you, his weathered face showing the lines of a man who has spent 30 years at sea. "What alternative exists? We are surrounded by ice for hundreds of miles in every direction. There are no settlements, no rescue possible until spring." You have been thinking about this problem since the ice first closed around the hull. Ice can be more than a prison. The Inuit build shelters from snow and ice that stay warm enough for survival. If we cannot stay warm on the ship, perhaps we can build shelter on the ice itself. William considers your words, his expression thoughtful. Then he shakes his head slowly. building shelter on the ice that imprisons us. There is poetry in that, though bitter poetry. But James, do you know how to build such shelters? I know the principles from accounts I have read, and Thomas, our harpooner, lived with an Inuit family for a winter when he was young. Between us, we might manage something workable. But would knowledge from books and old memories be enough to save 18 men from Arctic winter? William makes his decision quickly, as captains must. Speak with Thomas. Determine what is possible. If you believe we can create better shelter than the ship provides, you have my authority to proceed. Choose the men you need and begin immediately. We have no time to waste. You find Thomas in the forward hold, checking the lashing on barrels of salt pork. He is a large man, broad-shouldered and thick-armed from years handling harpoon lines, with a full beard that has gone mostly gray despite his 40 years. When you explain what you need, his eyes widen with surprise, then narrow with calculation. I lived with the Inuit 15 years ago, he says slowly, his hands still working automatically to secure the barrel. I was young, shipwrecked, rescued by hunters. They fed me through the winter, taught me their ways. I remember some of building snow houses, though whether I remember enough. Together we know more than each of us alone, you respond, and we have 18 men to contribute labor and ideas. We begin with what we know and learn the rest through trial. Thomas straightens, decision made. We will need to scout for the right location. The snow must be deep enough and the right consistency. We will need tools, saws for cutting ice blocks, shovels for moving snow. We will need time, several days at least, to build properly. You spend the afternoon gathering tools and materials while Thomas walks the ice around the ship, testing snow depth with a long pole, examining drifts, searching for the ideal construction site. The temperature hovers around 20 degrees below zero, cold enough that exposed skin freezes in minutes, but not so cold that working outside becomes impossible. The sun, weak and pale even at midday, will set soon and not rise again for nearly 2 months. You are entering the period of polar night, when darkness rules completely and cold deepens to levels that can kill in hours. By evening, Thomas has selected a site perhaps 50 yards from the ship, where a natural depression in the ice has accumulated deep snow. The crew gathers to hear his plan, their faces dim in the twilight, lit by lanterns that swing gently in the light breeze. We build a snow house, what the Inuit call an igloo, Thomas explains, his voice steady and confident. We cut blocks of snow, each about 3 feet long, 2 feet high, 1 foot thick. We arrange these blocks in a spiral, each row leaning slightly inward until we create a dome. The entrance is a tunnel, lower than the sleeping platform inside, so cold air sinks and warm air stays where we sleep. Henry, the ship's cook, asks the question several others are thinking. Will such a structure really keep us warm? It seems impossible that snow, which is frozen water, could provide warmth. Thomas nods, expecting the skepticism. Snow is mostly trapped air. Air is excellent insulation. Inside a properly built snow house, with the entrance sealed and several bodies generating heat, the temperature can reach above freezing even when outside it is 40 below. I have experienced this myself. The crew begins work the next morning, or what passes for morning in the perpetual twilight of polar night. You organize the men into teams: cutters who saw the snow blocks, carriers who transport them to the construction site, and builders who place them according to Thomas's instructions. The work is exhausting, each block weighing 40 or 50 pounds, the cold sapping strength with every breath. You take your turn at every task, wanting to understand each step of the process. Sawing the blocks requires careful technique, cutting through compacted snow without breaking the pieces. You learn to test the snow's consistency, looking for the firm, wind-packed layers that create the strongest blocks. You learn to shape each block slightly, beveling the edges so they fit together more precisely. You learn to work steadily but not frantically, conserving energy for the long hours of labor. The first day's work creates only the foundation ring and part of the first spiral row. The structure rises slowly, each block placed with care, checked for stability before the next is added. Thomas moves among the workers, adjusting placements, demonstrating techniques, encouraging patience. As darkness deepens and temperatures drop, you retreat to the ship for a cold meal and colder sleep, your muscles aching, your fingers stiff despite thick mittens. The second day brings better progress. The spiral grows steadily upward, the dome beginning to take recognizable shape. You see how each block leans slightly on the one before it, creating a self-supporting structure that grows stronger as it rises. The physics are elegant, simple principles of angles and weight distribution that have served Arctic peoples for thousands of years. You feel a grudging admiration for the knowledge preserved in these building techniques, wisdom earned through countless winters of trial and error. On the third day, you place the final keystone block at the dome's apex, completing the basic structure. The snow house is not large, perhaps 12 feet in diameter, but it can shelter 8 or 10 men comfortably. Thomas announces plans to build a second structure immediately, and perhaps a third if time and strength allow. The crew needs protection more than rest. But first, you must test what you have built. Can snow truly preserve life in these brutal conditions? As evening approaches, 8 men, including yourself, crawl through the entrance tunnel into the completed snow house. The interior is dim, lit only by a single oil lamp, but you can see the dome rising above you, each block clearly visible, the spiral pattern obvious now from the inside. The floor is covered with spare canvas from the ship, providing slight insulation from the ice beneath. Each man carries his own bedding, thin blankets and sleeping bags that are inadequate alone but might suffice when combined with the structure's insulation. You settle into position, sitting with your back against the curved wall, your shoulder touching Peter's shoulder on one side and Michael's on the other. The closeness is uncomfortable in the abstract, but necessary in reality. Body heat, shared among 8 men in an enclosed space, might create enough warmth to survive the night. The question is whether might will prove sufficient. Thomas seals the entrance tunnel with a block of snow, leaving only a small gap for ventilation. The lamp flame flickers as air currents adjust, then steadies. The temperature inside the structure is perhaps 10 degrees warmer than outside, a modest improvement, but noticeable. You can feel the cold still present, pressing against the thin snow walls, seeking entry, but it no longer cuts with the same immediate brutality. "We settle in for the night," Thomas announces quietly. "We stay close together, sharing warmth. We monitor the air quality carefully. If anyone feels dizzy or short of breath, speak immediately. We take turns watching, 2 men awake at all times, keeping the lamp burning low, checking ventilation." The first hours pass slowly, uncomfortably. The cold seeps through clothing and bedding despite the structure's insulation. Your toes grow numb, your fingers ache. You shift position constantly, seeking warmth that remains elusive. Around you, men breathe heavily, cough occasionally, whisper quiet complaints or encouragements. Then, gradually, you notice a change. The air inside the structure grows noticeably warmer. Not warm by any comfortable standard, but warmer than it was, warmer than the ship's hold. Warm enough that the immediate threat of freezing recedes. 8 bodies, generating heat through the simple act of living and breathing, have raised the interior temperature. The snow walls trap this heat, hold it, create a pocket of relative warmth in the frozen waste. You watch as frost on the interior walls begins to melt slightly, the surface glazing over with a thin layer of ice. This glazing, Thomas had explained, actually improves insulation, creating a smoother, harder interior that holds heat even better. The structure is improving itself through use, adapting to the very warmth it creates. Sleep comes in fragments, brief periods of unconsciousness interrupted by cold or discomfort or the simple strangeness of your situation. But it comes, which is more than you could say for nights on the frozen ship. When you wake during your watch shift, you find the lamp still burning steadily, the air still breathable, though thick, and the men around you sleeping with less obvious distress than they showed in the ship's hold. You have survived the first night. The snow house works, at least in principle. Now you must discover whether it will work for weeks, for months, for however long winter holds you in its frozen grip. Morning brings renewed energy and purpose. The 8 men emerge from the snow house stiff and cold but alive, their faces showing relief rather than despair. William gathers them immediately to hear their report. You describe the night honestly, mentioning both the cold that remained and the warmth that gradually built, the discomfort but also the sense that survival was possible. William makes his decision immediately. We build 2 more structures. We move the entire crew out of the ship and into these snow houses. We establish a rotation for cooking and other tasks that require returning to the ship, but we sleep in the snow shelters. James, Thomas, you lead the construction. Choose your teams and proceed. The next week passes in a blur of exhausting labor. 3 snow houses rise on the ice around the ship, each slightly different as the crew learns and adapts techniques. The second structure is larger, accommodating 10 men. The third incorporates a raised sleeping platform, keeping bodies further from the cold ice below. Each improvement builds on lessons learned from previous construction. Robert the carpenter contributes his own expertise, suggesting ways to strengthen joints between blocks, creating supports that hold weight more effectively. Henry, the cook, designs a small cooking area near one structure's entrance where a fire can be managed without filling the interior with smoke. Each crew member adds something to the collective knowledge, and the structures become better, more livable, more adapted to their specific needs. As the snow houses are completed and the crew settles into new routines, you begin to notice something unexpected. The ice beneath and around the ship is not uniformly solid. There are sounds, faint but persistent, of movement below the frozen surface. Creaking, groaning, sometimes a sharp crack like distant thunder. At first, you dismiss these as normal sounds of ice shifting, adjusting to temperature changes and pressure. But one evening, returning to the snow house from the ship, you notice something that stops you in your tracks. A crack in the ice near the bow, thin and barely visible in the twilight, releases a faint wisp of vapor. Not steam exactly, but warmer air rising from below, visible in the extreme cold. You kneel to examine it more closely, your face inches from the crack, and you feel the warmth, subtle but unmistakable. Something beneath the ice is warmer than the ice itself. Could there be more hidden below than just frozen seawater? You share your observation with Thomas that night in the snow house. He listens carefully, his expression thoughtful in the lamp's dim light. Around you, 6 other men sleep or pretend to sleep, their breathing forming the familiar rhythm of shared shelter. I have heard tales, Thomas says quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, of places in the Arctic where heat rises from deep in the earth. Hot springs, geothermal vents, places where the planet's internal fire reaches close to the surface. If such a place exists beneath this ice, it could mean warmer conditions below the surface, you finish the thought. Perhaps even liquid water or air pockets warmed by rising heat. It could mean better shelter than what we have built. It could also mean danger, Thomas counters, ever practical. Thin ice over water, pockets that could collapse, steam that could scald. We would need to investigate carefully, methodically. You spend the next several days observing the crack, noting how the vapor rises more strongly during certain hours, how the ice around it shows subtle discoloration. You expand your search, walking carefully around the ship, looking for similar signs. You find 2 more locations where faint warmth rises from below, both within 100 yards of the ship. William, when you present your findings, responds with characteristic directness. If there is warmer shelter below the ice, we need to access it. Choose 2 men and investigate, but carefully, James. We can afford to lose no one to accidents. You select Thomas for his Arctic experience and David, a young sailor with a talent for careful observation and steady nerves. The 3 of you spend a day preparing tools and equipment: ice saws, ropes, poles for testing ice thickness, lanterns, and supplies for several hours of work. The descent begins at the largest crack, where vapor rises most strongly. You widen the crack carefully, sawing through ice that proves to be surprisingly thin, only 2 feet thick where you expected 6 or 8. Below the ice is not water, but a narrow passage slanting downward into darkness. Cold air, yes, but noticeably warmer than the surface, and carrying a strange scent, mineral and slightly sulfurous. "We are mad to do this," David observes with a nervous laugh as he peers into the passage. "Crawling into ice toward unknown warmth in the coldest place on Earth." "Madness or wisdom, the line grows thin in extreme circumstances," Thomas responds philosophically. "We learn by looking, by exploring, by refusing to accept that what we see is all that exists." You lower yourself into the passage, first, rope secured around your waist, lantern in hand. The ice walls are smooth, almost glassy, formed by repeated melting and refreezing. The passage is barely wide enough for your shoulders, descending at perhaps a 30-degree angle. You move carefully, testing each handhold, calling back observations to Thomas and David above. After perhaps 20 feet of descent, the passage opens into a larger space. You emerge into a cavern, roughly circular, perhaps 30 feet across, with walls of clear ice that catch and multiply your lantern light into 1,000 dancing reflections. The floor is not ice, but stone, dark volcanic rock still holding faint warmth. And in the center of the cavern, a pool of liquid water, perhaps 10 feet across, with steam rising gently from its surface. You have found what the ice was hiding, a geothermal cavern, warmed by heat from deep in the earth, preserved beneath the frozen surface like a secret kept for thousands of years. And more than that, you see other passages leading away from this central cavern, darker tunnels descending further into unknown depths. This is not a single pocket, but a network, a system of natural caves that might offer shelter more sophisticated than anything you could build above. But with discovery comes a question that will determine everything that follows. Is this a refuge or a trap? You secure the rope and call for Thomas and David to descend. They arrive minutes later, their faces showing wonder as they take in the cavern's strange beauty. Thomas moves immediately to the pool, kneeling to test the water temperature with a careful hand. "Warm," he reports, his voice carrying an odd mixture of relief and concern. "Not hot, perhaps 90 degrees. Comfortable for bathing. The heat must rise from a vent deep below, warming the water as it seeps up through the rock." David explores the cavern's perimeter, examining the ice walls with his lantern held high. The ceiling is stable, the ice is thick enough to support weight. But look at these passages, 3 of them leading away. This cavern connects to something larger. You feel the same pull David expresses, the explorer's instinct to see what lies beyond the known. But you also feel responsibility, the weight of 18 lives depending on your judgment. You make a decision that balances both impulses. We document this cavern thoroughly. We test the air quality, the temperature, the stability of all surfaces. Then we explore one passage, but only for 30 minutes. We go together, we stay roped together, and we retreat at any sign of danger. Agreed? Thomas and David nod agreement, and you set to work. The air in the cavern proves to be breathable and relatively warm, perhaps 40 degrees Fahrenheit, an almost tropical warmth compared to the brutality above. The ice walls show no signs of immediate collapse or melting. The stone floor is solid, providing secure footing. The pool's edge is gentle, not a sudden drop-off, but a gradual slope. Everything suggests the cavern has existed in stable equilibrium for a long time. You select the largest passage for initial exploration, a tunnel perhaps 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, descending gently into darkness. The three of you proceed with caution, Thomas in the lead with a lantern, you in the middle carrying rope and tools, David bringing up the rear with a second lantern. The passage walls are smooth ice initially, then transition to bare rock as you descend below the frozen layer. The tunnel curves gradually, spiraling downward in a way that suggests natural formation rather than deliberate construction. Water carved this passage over countless years, you realize, flowing down from the surface during warmer seasons, following the path of least resistance through the stone. Now the water is gone or frozen, but the passage remains, a pathway into the Earth's hidden spaces. After perhaps 200 feet of careful descent, the tunnel opens into a second cavern, larger than the first. This chamber stretches perhaps 60 feet across, with a ceiling that rises 20 feet overhead. Multiple passages branch off in different directions, suggesting a more extensive network than you initially imagined. But most remarkably, this cavern is noticeably warmer than the one above, perhaps 50 degrees, and the walls show patches of dark mineral deposits rather than ice. We are below the permafrost layer, Thomas observes, running his hand along the bare rock wall, deep enough that Earth's heat reaches the air. If we descended further, the temperature would continue rising. Could we bring the crew here? David asks, the practical question that you have been thinking but not voicing. Could we survive winter in these caverns rather than on the surface? You consider the question carefully before responding. Possibly, but we would need to understand the risks. Are these caverns stable or subject to collapse? Is the air safe throughout the network or potentially toxic in deeper areas? Are there other hazards we have not yet identified? We need more information before making such a significant decision. The three of you spend another hour exploring passages branching from the second cavern, mapping as you go, noting temperatures and conditions. You discover a third cavern, smaller but even warmer, perhaps 60 degrees, with water trickling down one wall from a source above. This water is fresh, not salty like seawater, suggesting it comes from snowmelt that has somehow penetrated the ice. As you prepare to return to the surface and report your findings, Thomas notices something that changes the nature of your discovery. Carved into the stone wall of the third cavern, barely visible in the lantern light, are marks that could not have formed naturally. Straight lines, deliberate patterns, the unmistakable signs of human work. Someone has been here before, Thomas says, quietly, tracing the marks with his fingers. These are old, very old, but they are carved intentionally. People knew about these caverns long before we arrived. The implications settle over you like a heavy blanket. These caverns are not a virgin discovery, but a rediscovery. Others have sheltered here, perhaps many others over centuries or even millennia. The knowledge brings both comfort and unease. Comfort because it suggests the caverns are safe enough for human habitation. Unease because it raises questions about who carved these marks and what became of them. You examine the carvings more closely, trying to understand their meaning. They appear to be simple geometric patterns, perhaps counting marks or calendar notations. Near them, you find what might be soot stains from old fires, evidence of prolonged occupation rather than brief visits. Someone, at some time, lived in these caverns through an Arctic winter just as you are contemplating doing now. But why are the caverns empty now? What drove away or destroyed the previous occupants? The three of you return to the surface with careful haste, climbing back through the narrow passage to emerge onto the ice. The cold strikes like a physical blow after the relative warmth below. You pull the entrance closed, marking it carefully so it can be found again, and return to the snow houses to share your discovery with William and a crew. The captain listens to your report with characteristic focus, asking pointed questions about stability, temperature, air quality, and the evidence of previous occupation. When you finish, he sits silent for several minutes, weighing options and risks. The crew gathered in the largest snow house waits for his decision, their faces showing hope and fear in equal measure. "We face a choice," William finally says, addressing everyone. "We can remain in these snow houses we have built, surviving but not thriving, enduring cold and discomfort for months. Or we can move into the caverns, accepting unknown risks in exchange for warmth and better shelter. I will not make this decision alone. Each man will speak, sharing his thoughts. Then we will decide together." The discussion that follows is remarkable for its civility and thoughtfulness. 18 men facing extreme hardship, yet no one shouts or demands. Each speaks in turn, weighing risks and benefits, expressing fears and hopes. Some argue for the caution of staying with known shelter. Others advocate for the improvement the caverns promise. Still others propose compromise, move part of the crew below while leaving others on the surface, maintaining connection to the ship and supplies. You listen carefully to each voice, noting the wisdom that emerges from collective thought. Henry, the cook, points out that cooking could be done more safely and efficiently in the warmer caverns. Robert, the carpenter, suggests building additional supports in critical passages to reduce collapse risk. Peter, a quiet sailor who rarely speaks, observes that the evidence of previous occupation suggests the caverns have survived countless winters without major collapse. Finally, William calls for a decision. Who wishes to attempt moving into the caverns? 16 hands rise, including your own. Only William and one other man, Old George, who has sailed these waters for 40 years, prefer to remain in the snow houses. William nods, accepting the crew's judgment. "Then we proceed carefully and methodically," he announces. "James, Thomas, and David will return to the caverns tomorrow with additional men, exploring further, mapping passages, identifying the best locations for living spaces. We will move supplies gradually, establishing the caverns as our primary shelter while maintaining the snow houses as backup. If any sign of danger appears, we retreat immediately. This is calculated risk, not reckless gamble." The next days pass in intense activity. Teams descend into the caverns in shifts, carrying supplies, tools, bedding, food stores. The entrance passage is widened to make access easier. Ropes are installed as guides through the tunnels. The first cavern becomes a gathering space, the second a sleeping area, the third a cooking and water collection point. The network of caverns transforms from natural formation to improvised underground settlement. You establish routines adapted to subterranean life. Teams rotate between the caverns and the surface, maintaining the connection to the ship, checking conditions, standing watch. Time loses its normal markers in the permanent darkness of the caverns, so you implement a schedule based on pocket watches, dividing each day into regular segments for work, meals, rest, and watch duty. The improvement in daily life is immediate and remarkable. The relative warmth of the caverns, while not comfortable by ordinary standards, feels luxurious after weeks of brutal cold. Men can move without multiple layers of clothing. Water needs no melting. The air, while carrying the faint mineral scent of deep earth, is breathable, and does not sting the throat with cold. Simple tasks become easier, and with easier tasks comes better morale. Thomas takes on the role of cave master, overseeing daily operations below the surface. His experience with Arctic survival and his calm, steady nature make him natural for the position. He establishes rules. No one explores new passages alone. All fires must be carefully monitored for smoke and air quality. Waste must be disposed of properly in designated areas far from living spaces. Everyone contributes to maintaining cleanliness and order. You focus on continued exploration and mapping. In the days following the initial move, you and David discover that the cavern network is more extensive than you first realized. Beyond the third cavern lie at least a dozen more chambers, some small and tight, others vast spaces that echo with the sound of dripping water. Some passages descend to areas too warm for comfortable occupation, where volcanic heat raises temperatures above 80 degrees. Others climb toward the ice above, creating ventilation routes that keep air fresh throughout the network. In one particularly large cavern, perhaps 400 feet from the main entrance, you make a discovery that transforms your understanding of the previous occupants. The walls of this chamber are covered with carvings, not simple marks, but detailed images showing people, animals, ships, and scenes of daily life. This is not casual graffiti, but intentional record-keeping, a pictorial history left by people who clearly spent significant time in these caves. You study the carvings carefully by lantern light, trying to understand their story. The images show a ship, similar in design to your own, trapped in ice. They show people building shelters on the surface and then discovering the caverns. They show life underground, hunting on the surface, survival through winter. The sequence is similar to your experience, suggesting that the previous occupants faced the same circumstances you now face. But the story does not end with spring rescue. The final images show something different, people leaving the caverns and moving deeper underground, descending into passages that lead away from the ice. The last image is ambiguous, showing either departure toward some unknown destination or transformation into forms that you cannot quite interpret. What happened to the people who left these marks? Where did they go? Or what did they become? You share your discovery with Thomas and William that evening, sketching the images in your journal, trying to capture their essential meaning. The three of you discuss possible interpretations, but certainty remains elusive. Perhaps the previous occupants found a way to travel underground to warmer regions. Perhaps they were rescued by people from below rather than above. Perhaps the images record myth or wishful thinking rather than actual events. Or perhaps, William says quietly, his weathered face serious in the lamplight, they are warning us about something we have not yet encountered. A reason to leave the caverns despite their comfort. A danger lurking deeper in the network. The suggestion brings a chill that has nothing to do with temperature. You have felt secure in the caverns, grateful for their warmth and shelter. The idea that they might harbor some hidden threat you have not yet identified is deeply unsettling. But you cannot ignore the possibility, not with the evidence of the carvings before you. We increase vigilance, you decide. We explore more carefully, watching for signs of danger. We establish strict boundaries for how deep we venture. We prepare evacuation plans in case we need to return to the surface quickly. But we do not abandon the caverns based on speculation. We balance caution with need. The crew accepts these new protocols without complaint. Guards are posted at key passages. Regular checks are made of air quality and structural stability. Explorations continue, but with added care. Life in the caverns takes on a quality of watchful waiting, comfort mixed with awareness that you inhabit someone else's abandoned refuge. Weeks pass in this suspended state. Winter deepens above, the cold reaching extremes that would have killed you on the surface. But below, in the warm network of caverns, life continues with surprising normality. Men develop routines, find ways to occupy time, create small comforts in their underground existence. Henry experiments with cooking methods adapted to the caverns. Robert carves chess pieces from stone and challenges anyone willing to play. Thomas teaches interested crew members the Inuit knowledge he carries, passing on survival skills that might serve in future crises. You focus on completing a comprehensive map of the explored caverns, documenting every passage, chamber, and feature. The map grows complex, showing multiple levels and interconnections that form a three-dimensional maze. You realize that you have explored perhaps a third of the network, maybe less. Large sections remain unmapped, mysterious, potentially dangerous, or potentially valuable. One evening, during your watch shift in the deepest explored chamber, you notice something that has escaped previous attention. A draft, faint but persistent, flowing from a passage you had marked as too narrow for exploration. Air moving means the passage connects to something larger, a space where air can flow and circulate. You mark the location for investigation the next day. When you return with Thomas and David, the three of you examine the narrow passage more carefully. It is tight, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, but it does open after perhaps 20 feet. You can see lantern light reflecting on walls beyond the restriction. Something larger exists beyond this bottleneck. "We should investigate," David says eagerly. He is young, still possessed of the adventurer's spirit that older men learn to temper with caution. If there is another large chamber beyond, it could provide additional space for the crew or resources we need. Or it could provide danger we do not need, Thomas counters. Narrow passages like this can trap men if conditions change. I recommend we widen the passage before attempting to go through. You make the decision. We widen the entrance enough to ensure safe retreat. Then we investigate carefully, just the three of us initially. If what we find seems valuable and safe, we bring more men. If it seems dangerous, we seal this passage and mark it as restricted. The work of widening the passage takes most of a day. Careful chiseling of rock using tools from the ship. When you finally squeeze through into the space beyond, you find yourself in a cavern unlike any you have explored before. This chamber is not a natural formation, but clearly shaped by intelligent design. The walls are too smooth, too regular. The ceiling rises in a perfect dome. And in the center of the chamber sits a structure, ancient and strange, built from stones that did not originate in these caverns. You have found the heart of the previous occupant's settlement, and it is far more sophisticated than you imagined. The structure in the chamber's center is roughly circular, perhaps 15 feet in diameter, built from carefully fitted stones that show signs of shaping rather than natural formation. The walls rise about 6 feet before meeting a stone roof, creating an enclosed space with a small entrance on one side. Around the structure, the cavern floor is covered with objects: pottery vessels, stone tools, carved bones, woven materials partially preserved, and other artifacts that speak of extended occupation. Thomas moves among the artifacts carefully, examining items with the trained eye of someone who has seen indigenous Arctic craftsmanship. "This is Thule culture work," he says with certainty, "the ancestors of modern Inuit. These items are old, perhaps centuries old, but recognizable. This was a settled space, not a temporary shelter." David focuses on the central structure, circling it, peering through the entrance. It looks like a house, a permanent dwelling built inside this natural cave. Why would people build a stone house inside a cavern that already provides shelter? You consider the question while examining the artifacts. The pottery vessels are marked with patterns, some functional decorations, others that might represent writing or record-keeping. The carved bones show scenes similar to those on the cavern walls. hunting, daily life, but also images that seem to represent the caverns themselves. Maps, perhaps, or guides for future occupants. They lived here for a long time, you conclude, piecing together evidence. Not just one winter, but multiple winters, possibly years. This was not an emergency shelter, but a deliberate settlement. They chose to live in these caverns rather than on the surface. But why? David persists. The surface is hostile, but the Thule people were adapted to surface living. They had technology for Arctic survival. Why retreat underground? The answer, you suspect, lies in the central structure. You approach it carefully, noting how the entrance faces toward the passage you came through, how the walls show soot stains from fires, how the interior is divided into sleeping and working areas. This was designed for extended occupation, built with knowledge of how to make underground living sustainable. Inside the structure, you find more artifacts and something else. Writings or records of some kind, carved into flat stones, arranged in careful rows. The symbols are unfamiliar, not matching any writing system you know, but clearly deliberate communication. Someone who lived here wanted to leave a message, to communicate with whoever might come after. You gather the carved stones carefully, bringing them into better light to examine. Thomas studies them with you, his brow furrowed in concentration. Neither of you can read the symbols, but patterns emerge. Some stones seem to show numbers or counting systems. Others might represent maps or diagrams. Still others show combinations of symbols that repeat, suggesting words or concepts being recorded systematically. This is a library, you realize with sudden clarity. These people did not just live here, they documented their knowledge, preserving it for future generations or future visitors. This cavern was intentionally created as a repository of survival knowledge. But if they went to such trouble to preserve knowledge, what happened to the people themselves? The three of you spend hours in the chamber, examining artifacts, trying to understand the story they tell. The evidence suggests occupation over many years, perhaps decades. Multiple generations lived in this underground settlement, adapting to cavern life, creating culture and knowledge systems suited to their unique environment. They thrived, at least for a time. But the settlement is now empty, abandoned, with artifacts left behind as if the occupants departed suddenly rather than gradually. There are no human remains, no signs of violence or disaster. The people simply left, taking little with them, leaving most of their possessions and all of their recorded knowledge. As evening approaches, marked only by pocket watch since day and night have no meaning in the caverns, you gather the most important artifacts for return to the main living area. The carved stones especially deserve careful preservation and study. Perhaps among the crew, someone will recognize the symbols or have knowledge that aids interpretation. Before leaving, you take a final look around the chamber, trying to understand what you're seeing. This was a place of learning, of knowledge preservation, of intentional culture building in extreme circumstances. The Thule people who lived here did not merely survive winter. They created something meaningful, something worth recording and preserving. Their departure does not diminish what they built. You notice, almost as an afterthought, that the chamber has multiple exits beyond the narrow passage you used to enter. At least 3 other tunnels lead away into darkness, suggesting the settlement connected to other parts of the cavern network you have not yet explored. The previous occupants had choices about where to go, multiple routes for movement and escape. When you return to the main living area and show your discoveries to the crew, the reaction is immediate and enthusiastic. Men crowd around to see the artifacts, to examine the carved stones, to hear about the ancient settlement you found. William listens carefully to your description, his expression thoughtful. "This changes our understanding of the caverns," he says when you finish. They are not just natural shelter, but deliberately chosen refuge, selected and improved by people who understood their value. The Thule culture had options for where to live, yet they chose to invest significant effort in underground settlement. That suggests powerful advantages we may not have fully appreciated. Or it suggests powerful threats on the surface that drove them below, Thomas counters, always the voice of caution. We should not assume their choices were purely positive. They may have been fleeing something rather than seeking something. The debate that follows involves the entire crew, men offering theories and interpretations based on their own knowledge and experience. Peter, who has read extensively about Arctic peoples, notes that Thule culture thrived during a period of climatic warming, when survival conditions should have been easier. Their retreat underground seems contrary to expected behavior. Henry suggests disease or conflict might have driven them to isolation. Robert wonders if they discovered resources in the caverns that made underground living more attractive than surface hunting. You listen to all perspectives, adding your own observations, noting how collective intelligence produces insights no individual could reach alone. This is perhaps the greatest survival skill the crew has developed, the ability to think together, to pool knowledge, to reach decisions through discussion rather than decree. As the evening progresses and men settle into sleep, you find yourself drawn back to the carved stones, studying them by lamplight while others rest. The symbols resist easy interpretation, but patterns gradually emerge. A particularly complex stone shows what might be a calendar system, marks that could represent lunar cycles or seasonal changes. Another stone shows connected symbols in a way that suggests relationships or hierarchies. A third contains repeated elements that might be a legend or key for interpreting other stones. You work late into the night, sketching symbols in your journal, testing different interpretations, slowly building a fragmentary understanding. It is painstaking work, more frustration than insight, but you persist because the knowledge these stones contain might be crucial. If the previous occupants left guidance about the caverns, about their use and dangers, that information could save lives. Thomas joins you during his watch shift, sitting across from you, studying the stones from his own perspective. Together, you make connections neither saw alone. A symbol you interpreted as water, Thomas recognizes as similar to Inuit markers for warmth from below. A pattern you thought represented counting, Thomas sees as navigation markers, direction indicators for finding paths through the cavern network. They created a guide, Thomas says with growing certainty. These stones are not history or culture or philosophy, they are practical instructions for living in these caverns. They tell how to find water, how to navigate, how to avoid dangers, how to survive winter underground. This is a manual, left deliberately for whoever might need it. The realization energizes you both. If Thomas is correct, these stones contain exactly the knowledge you need most. You redouble your efforts on interpretation, working through the night, comparing stones, testing theories, slowly deciphering meaning from ancient symbols. By morning, you have assembled a partial translation of what you now call the Cavern Guide. The stones describe a network larger than you have explored, connecting to other cavern systems extending for miles beneath the ice. They warn of specific dangers, passages that flood during certain seasons, areas with toxic gases, chambers with unstable ceilings. They mark sources of warmth, of fresh water, of good air circulation. They describe seasonal patterns in the caverns, how conditions change throughout the year. Most importantly, they describe an exit route, a passage leading south and downward, emerging eventually in warmer lands where the Thule people had other settlements. The ancient occupants did not abandon these caverns because of danger or disaster. They left because winter ended and they chose to move on, following routes beneath the earth that connected their hidden refuge to their surface world. But could those routes still be traversed after centuries of potential collapse, flooding, or other changes? You present your findings to William and the crew the next day, explaining what you and Thomas have deciphered, showing the sketches and translations. The crew's reaction is complex. Relief that the previous occupants left by choice rather than being driven out. Excitement about the existence of southern routes that might offer escape without waiting for spring. But also concern about the reliability of centuries-old information and the risks of attempting long underground journeys. William considers carefully before responding. We have 3 options. First, we remain in these caverns until spring, then return to the ship and sail home if the ice releases us. Second, we attempt to follow the southern route described in the stones, seeking to reach warmer lands through underground travel. Third, we split the crew, sending a small expedition to scout the southern route while most remain here in relative safety. He pauses, letting the crew absorb these options, then continues. I will not order any man to remain or to travel. Each must choose based on his own assessment of risks and benefits. We will discuss, we will plan, and then we will decide together how to proceed. The discussion that follows lasts for hours, stretching through multiple watches and mealtimes. Men weigh the known risks of staying against the unknown risks of traveling. Some argue for patience, trusting that spring will come and the ship will be released. Others advocate for the adventure of southern routes, seeing opportunity in the ancient knowledge. Still others counsel caution, suggesting scouting expeditions before committing the entire crew. You find yourself torn between options. The navigator in you wants to map the routes, to understand the full extent of the cavern network, to follow the Thule people's path to its conclusion. But the responsible crew member recognizes that such a journey carries enormous risks, that underground travel without full knowledge could lead to disaster. Thomas, when asked for his opinion, speaks with his characteristic blend of experience and humility. I have lived through one Arctic winter by trusting indigenous knowledge. The Inuit who saved me knew things about survival that I would never have discovered alone. These stones represent similar knowledge, hard-won wisdom about underground survival. I believe they are trustworthy guides. But I also know that conditions change, that centuries can transform passages, and that even good knowledge can become outdated. I would scout before committing. His measured response seems to capture the crew's collective sentiment. A consensus emerges around the idea of a scouting expedition, a small group following the route described in the stones, traveling as far as safe, assessing conditions, then returning with information that would guide larger decisions. If the route proves viable, more men could follow. If not, the crew would remain in the caverns until spring. William calls for volunteers for the scouting expedition. You raise your hand immediately, followed by Thomas, David, and 5 others. 8 men willing to risk the unknown for knowledge that might save 18 lives. William accepts the volunteers, then establishes parameters. The expedition will carry 2 weeks of supplies, will travel together at all times, will retreat immediately if dangers become overwhelming, and will return within 3 weeks regardless of how far they progress. You go with our hopes, but not our expectations, William tells the expedition before departure. Return with information, whether that information is positive or negative. Return with your lives above all. We can survive winter here in the caverns. What we need most is not escape, but knowledge of our options. The next 2 days are spent in preparation. Supplies are gathered and rationed carefully. Additional carved stones are studied, trying to extract every piece of relevant information. The southern route is identified among the passages leading from the settlement chamber, marked clearly by symbols that match those on the guide stones. Equipment is checked and rechecked. Ropes, lanterns, oil for light, food, water containers, tools for clearing passages if necessary. On the morning of departure, the crew gathers in the main cavern to see the expedition off. There are no speeches, no dramatic farewells, just quiet handshakes and wishes for safe travel. You shoulder your pack, adjust the rope coiled at your waist, check your lantern one final time, and then you are descending into the passage marked with ancient symbols, leaving the known for the unknown, trusting knowledge preserved in stone by people long gone. The passage starts wide and comfortable, descending at a gentle angle deeper into the earth. The walls are smooth stone, water-carved over geological time, with the intentional markings you now recognize as navigation guides appearing at regular intervals. The temperature rises slightly as you descend, confirming that you are moving away from the ice and closer to sources of geothermal warmth. After perhaps an hour of steady walking, the passage opens into a small chamber with 3 exits. The guidestones describe this choice point, marking the center passage as the correct route south. You examine each exit carefully before proceeding, noting the symbols carved near each, confirming the center passage matches the descriptions. The expedition continues. The pattern repeats multiple times over the next hours. Descend through passage, reach choice point, identify correct route using symbols, continue. The ancient navigation system works perfectly, leaving no doubt about which way to travel. You mark your own passage as well, using chalk to leave arrows that will guide return even if lanterns fail or memory falters. As the first day of travel ends, measured by pocket watch rather than any external light, you reach a larger chamber that the guidestones indicated as a rest point. The chamber has a natural spring, fresh water pooling in a stone basin, and enough flat floor space for the expedition to sleep comfortably. Previous travelers clearly used this as a campsite, as evidenced by soot marks on walls and arranged stones that might have supported sleeping platforms. You establish camp, setting watch rotations, preparing a cold meal from supplies, since fire is deemed too risky without certainty about air quality. The 8 men settle in for rest, their conversations quiet, focused on the day's observations and speculations about what lies ahead. Thomas voices a thought that has been growing in your own mind. The ancient occupants traveled this route regularly. The navigation markers are too well maintained, too clear, to represent a single journey. They moved between surface and underground worlds, using these passages as highways connecting different parts of their territory. This was not an escape route, but a regular thoroughfare. The observation shifts your understanding again. If these passages were regularly traveled routes, they should be relatively safe and well maintained. The risks might be lower than you feared. But it also raises questions about why the routes fell out of use, why modern Inuit did not mention them, why the knowledge became lost rather than preserved. What happened to break the connection between surface and underground worlds? Sleep comes fitfully in the strange environment of the rest chamber. The darkness is absolute when lanterns are shuttered, the silence profound, except for the soft drip of the spring and the breathing of sleeping men. You wake several times during your rest period, momentarily disoriented, reaching for reference points that do not exist underground. Each time you reorient by sound and memory, checking your watch to confirm you have not slept over long, then settling back into uneasy rest. The second day brings new challenges. The passages grow narrower, requiring single-file travel and occasional crawling through tight restrictions. The air remains breathable but carries different scents, sulfurous in some areas, metallic in others, suggesting chemical processes happening in the rock around you. The temperature fluctuates, rising in some passages to uncomfortable warmth, dropping in others to levels that require donning extra layers. You reach another choice point where the guidestones provided less clear directions. The symbols are present but worn, harder to read, suggesting this area received less regular traffic. 2 passages lead south from this chamber, both seemingly valid options. You study the faint markings carefully, comparing them to sketches in your journal, debating interpretation with Thomas. The right passage is marked with the symbol for fast water, Thomas observes. That might indicate a stream or flooding risk. The left passage shows the marker for long walk, suggesting it is more extended but perhaps safer. You make the decision. We take the left passage. We prioritize safety over speed. If the right passage is faster but riskier, we accept the longer journey. The choice proves sound. The choice proves sound. The left passage is indeed long, stretching for hours with minimal variation, but it is safe and easy to traverse. The right passage, you later discover when it reconnects with your route, shows signs of significant water damage and partial collapse. The ancient markers, properly interpreted, steered you away from danger. As the second day concludes, you reach another rest chamber, similar to the first, but with additional features. This chamber has evidence of more elaborate occupation. Stone platforms clearly designed as beds, fire pits with carefully arranged ventilation systems, storage areas carved into the walls. This was not just a rest stop, but a way station, a place where travelers could recover from journeys or wait out dangerous conditions. The walls of this chamber carry carvings similar to those in the settlement you discovered. Images of people traveling underground, carrying supplies, moving between worlds. One image shows clearly the surface world above with ice and snow, and below it the connected cavern world with warmth and shelter. The message seems clear. These are not separate realities, but integrated landscapes, both necessary for survival in Arctic conditions. That night, gathered in the way station with lanterns burning low, you calculate progress and project timelines. You have traveled perhaps 15 miles from the main caverns, all of it downward and southward. The guide stones suggest another 25 miles to the southern exit, though without knowing what conditions lie ahead, time estimates remain uncertain. At your current pace, you might reach the exit in 3 or 4 more days, leaving comfortable time to return within the 3-week deadline. But the expedition's purpose is not just to reach the exit, but to assess whether the entire crew could make this journey safely. You discuss this around the dim lanterns, each man sharing observations about passage conditions, physical demands, and risks encountered. David, the youngest and most physically capable, argues that the journey is manageable for healthy men. The passages are challenging but not impossible. With proper planning and the guide stones to navigate, the crew could make this trip. It would be difficult but achievable. Robert, older and more cautious, expresses concern about the weakest crew members. We are 8 healthy men carrying minimal supplies. The full crew includes men who are older, weaker, or already suffering from winter's effects. The journey that is merely difficult for us might be impossible for them. We must consider the weakest member, not the strongest. The debate continues without resolution. You need more information about what lies ahead before making recommendations. The expedition continues the next day, moving deeper into the cavern network, following the ancient routes that connect underground to surface worlds. The 3rd and 4th days bring the expedition to its greatest challenge yet. The passages, which had been relatively consistent in size and condition, begin showing significant variation. Some sections are pristine, unchanged from when the Thule people traveled them. Others show damage from water, from rockfalls, from the natural processes that slowly reshape underground spaces. The navigation becomes more complex, requiring careful route finding and occasional backtracking when passages prove impassable. In one particularly difficult section, the designated route is blocked completely by a rockfall that appears recent, certainly more recent than the last time these passages saw regular traffic. You are forced to find an alternate route, using the guide stone's secondary markers to identify backup passages. The detour adds hours to the journey and requires climbing over unstable rubble, but eventually you reconnect with the main route. The incident serves as a reminder that even good historical knowledge cannot account for all changes over time. The passages are not static, but evolving, subject to geological processes that slowly alter their character. Any decision to move the crew through these routes must account for this uncertainty, for the possibility that conditions might change unexpectedly. As the fourth day concludes, you reach a chamber unlike any you have seen before. This space is enormous, perhaps 300 feet across, with a ceiling so high your lantern light cannot reach it. The chamber is warm, warmer than any previous space, and you quickly identify the source. A massive pool of water, perhaps 100 feet across, with steam rising gently from its surface. The pool glows faintly with its own light, a blue-green bioluminescence that creates dim illumination throughout the chamber. "We have reached the warm chamber," Thomas says with certainty, recognizing the space from guide stone descriptions. This is the halfway point of the southern route, the place where travelers rested before the final push to the exit. The guide stones describe this place in detail because of its importance. The expedition explores the warm chamber carefully, finding evidence of extensive previous occupation. Stone structures circle the pool, providing shelter and workspaces. Carved markers cover the walls, showing images of healing, of rest, of renewal. This was not just a waypoint, but a destination, a place valued for its warmth and restorative properties. You test the pool water carefully. It is hot, perhaps 110 degrees, too warm for prolonged bathing, but perfect for therapeutic soaking. The water is mineral-rich, leaving deposits on your hand that feel smooth and slightly slippery. The pool's edge is gentle, allowing safe entry and exit, and the depth varies from shallow to perhaps 15 feet at the center. The 8 men of the expedition strip off their travel-stained clothes and enter the pool, sighing with relief as hot water soaks into tired muscles. The warmth penetrates deep, soothing aches from days of difficult travel, washing away the accumulated grime of underground journeying. For the first time since entering the caverns, you feel truly warm, heated from outside rather than from within, relaxed in a way that has not been possible during the constant vigilance of travel. You float in the warm water, staring up into darkness where the chamber's ceiling disappears, and you think about the people who found this place generations ago. They must have felt the same relief, the same gratitude for warmth in a frozen world. They must have recognized the warm chamber's value immediately, understanding that this was a place worth preserving, worth protecting, worth documenting so others could find it. Could the crew survive winter here, in this warm chamber, better than in the main caverns? The discussion that evening, conducted in the comfortable warmth of the chamber, addresses exactly that question. The warm chamber offers significant advantages over the main caverns. Greater warmth, abundant hot water for washing and cooking, more space for the crew, and clear evidence of safe, long-term occupation. If the crew could reach this chamber, life would improve dramatically. But reaching it requires 4 days of difficult travel through increasingly variable passages, carrying all necessary supplies, with no guarantee that the weakest crew members could complete the journey. And living here would mean abandoning the ship and all its resources, committing fully to underground existence with no easy return to the surface world. We must continue to the southern exit, you decide. We need to know where these passages lead, whether escape to warmer lands is truly possible. Then we can make informed recommendations about whether to bring the crew here, continue south, or remain in the main caverns. The expedition rests an additional day in the warm chamber, recovering strength and tending to minor injuries from the journey. Thomas examines the carved markers carefully, comparing them to his sketches of the guide stones, confirming the route forward. David explores side passages, finding storage chambers where ancient travelers kept supplies, and discovering preserved food containers that, while ancient, show sophisticated preservation techniques. When you resume travel, you feel renewed, stronger than when you arrived. The warm chamber proved its value as rest point, as exactly the midway refuge the ancient travelers designed it to be. You carry this knowledge forward, knowing that regardless of other decisions, the crew now has access to this remarkable resource. The final days of southward travel bring the expedition through passages that show increasing signs of surface proximity. The rock changes character, showing more sedimentary layers and less volcanic influence. The temperature gradually decreases, still warm compared to the frozen surface, but no longer the heated warmth of deep caverns. Plant roots begin appearing in ceiling cracks, seeking water, providing evidence that soil and vegetation exist somewhere above. Then, on the 7th day of travel, you see it: light. Not lantern light, but natural light, faint and dim but unmistakable, filtering down through a passage ahead. The expedition moves toward it with careful excitement, emerging finally onto a ledge that overlooks a world so different from the one you left that it seems almost dreamlike. Below you stretches a valley, snow-covered but not ice-locked, with trees visible on the slopes and smoke rising from distant structures that can only be human habitations. The sky above is gray with winter clouds, but not the absolute darkness of polar night. The sun, though low and weak, is visible. You have traveled from the deep Arctic to a more temperate region, moving south through underground passages that compressed weeks of surface travel into 7 days of cavern walking. You have found what the Thule people knew: a route from winter's heart to lands where winter is survivable, where human communities persist year-round, where rescue and resupply might be possible. The ancient knowledge preserved in stone has proven accurate, the routes still viable despite centuries of disuse. But as you stand on the ledge looking down at the valley, a new question emerges. Should you continue down to seek help, or return to the crew with the knowledge that escape is possible? The expedition discusses options while standing on the ledge, taking in the view of a world most of you thought unreachable. Thomas argues for continuing down to the valley, making contact with inhabitants, arranging for rescue or at least resupply of the crew. David suggests splitting the expedition, sending half down while half returns with news. You consider both options carefully before presenting your own recommendation. We return together, you say firmly. Our mission was to scout the route and assess viability. We have accomplished that goal. The route is passable, the exit is real, and help exists below. But we have been gone 12 days already. We have 9 days to return before exceeding our deadline. The crew needs the information we carry more than they need an additional week of waiting while we arrange rescue. Robert supports your position. The crew can make this journey if necessary. We are proof of that. But they need to choose whether to attempt it, and they need all available information to make that choice. We return and report. Then we decide together what happens next. The expedition spends 1 night near the exit, resting in sight of the valley. Then begins the return journey. Traveling the route in reverse proves faster than the initial journey. You know the way, recognize landmarks, avoid wrong turns that cost time before. The passages, while still challenging, feel familiar now rather than threatening. You move with confidence rather than caution, covering more distance each day. 4 days after leaving the exit, you reach the warm chamber again. The expedition rests for a day, recovering in the hot pool, preparing for the final pushback to the main caverns. Thomas uses this time to create detailed sketches of the entire route, marking every choice point, noting every hazard, documenting everything that might help future travelers. 3 days after leaving the warm chamber, you arrive back at the main caverns, emerging into the settlement chamber where your journey began. The crew, alerted by the watch, gathers quickly to greet you. Faces show relief, curiosity, hope, and fear in various combinations. William steps forward to clasp your hand. "You return," he says simply. "That alone tells us the most important thing. Now tell us everything else." The report takes hours, delivered to the full crew gathered in the main cavern, with Thomas, David, and others adding details and perspectives. You describe the route, the challenges, the warm chamber, the valley beyond the southern exit. You show the sketches, explain the navigation system, discuss the physical demands and risks. You present all information honestly, neither minimizing difficulties nor exaggerating opportunities. When you finish, William asks the essential question: can the crew make this journey, all 18 of us, with supplies sufficient to establish ourselves in the valley below? You consider carefully before answering. The strongest among us, certainly. The weakest, possibly not. The journey requires stamina, tolerance for difficulty, and constant focus. It is not impossible, but it is not easy. Some crew members might not survive the attempt. Then we must decide, William says, turning to address the crew, whether we remain here in relative comfort until spring, or we attempt the southern route to reach warmer lands and human contact. I will not make this decision alone. Each man must speak his mind. The discussion that follows is the most serious the crew has held. Men weigh known hardship against unknown opportunity, safety against freedom, patience against action. Some argue passionately for attempting the journey, seeing it as escape from months of confinement. Others counsel staying in the caverns, where conditions, while not ideal, are at least survivable and predictable. Henry, the cook, makes an observation that shifts the debate. What if we are not thinking about this correctly? What if the question is not whether all of us travel, but whether some of us travel? A small group could reach the valley, arrange rescue, return with supplies, or escort for the rest of the crew. We need not choose between everyone staying or everyone going. His suggestion opens new possibilities. Groups could travel south in waves, the strongest first to establish contact and arrange for support, the others following once help is secured. Or a permanent party could remain in the caverns while others journey to the valley, maintaining access to the ship and its resources while also creating connection to the southern settlements. The discussion continues through the night and into the next day. Gradually, a consensus emerges around a hybrid approach. Half the crew, including the youngest and strongest, will journey south to establish contact with valley settlements. The other half will remain in the caverns, maintaining the ship and the cavern settlement. If the southern journey succeeds, those who traveled south will return with supplies and assistance for those who remained. If the journey fails or proves too difficult, the travelers can return to the caverns. William calls for volunteers for the southern journey. 12 men step forward, including yourself, Thomas, David, and most of the expedition who already know the route. 6 men, including William and Old George, choose to remain in the caverns. The groups are balanced, each containing skilled and experienced members, each capable of surviving independently if necessary. The next week is spent in intense preparation. The southern party gathers supplies and practices the route through the settlement chamber and beyond, familiarizing those who did not travel before with passage conditions and navigation markers. The remaining party organizes the cavern settlement for long-term occupation by a smaller group, adjusting watch schedules and work assignments. On the morning of departure, the crew gathers one final time in the main cavern. William addresses both groups, his voice carrying the weight of command, but also the warmth of fellowship. "We are one crew of one ship," he says firmly. "Distance may separate us, but purpose unites us. Those who travel south carry our hopes for rescue and relief. Those who remain here carry our connection to the Aurora Borealis and the life we knew before ice claimed us. When we reunite, whether here or in the valley or back on the ship in spring, we will do so as brothers who survived winter through cooperation and trust. The southern party departs, descending into the passages you now know well, leaving the main caverns behind. You look back once before the first turn, seeing the remaining crew silhouetted against lantern light, their arms raised in farewell. Then the passage curves, and they are gone, and you are committed to the journey ahead. The southward travel proceeds smoothly, benefiting from the experience of the scouting expedition. The 12 men move efficiently, supporting each other through difficult sections, navigating confidently using the markers and your memory of the route. 4 days brings you to the warm chamber, where the party rests and recovers. 3 more days brings you to the exit ledge and the view of the valley below. Descending from the ledge to the valley floor proves more challenging than the cavern travel. The route is steep, icy in places, exposed to wind and weather after days of protected passage underground. But by afternoon of the 8th day, the party reaches the valley, emerging into a landscape that feels impossibly green and alive after months of white and ice. You approach the nearest structure carefully, unsure how inhabitants will react to 12 strange men appearing from the mountains in winter. But the reception is warmer than you hoped. The structure is a trading post operated by Norwegian settlers, people familiar with strange arrivals and winter hardship. When you explain your situation, the trader immediately offers assistance, food, warmth, and messages sent to authorities who can arrange formal rescue. Over the next weeks, the southern party establishes themselves in the valley community, working to earn their keep while waiting for conditions that will allow return to the caverns. Spring approaches gradually, the days lengthening, the sun climbing higher, the snow beginning its slow retreat. Word of the Aurora Borealis reaches authorities, and plans form for rescue once weather permits. As winter finally releases its grip, you organize the return journey to the caverns. A larger party now, including valley guides and additional supplies, you ascend back through the passages, retracing the route through now familiar chambers. The warm chamber, the choice points, the settlement chamber, all appear unchanged, waiting patiently for travelers to pass through. You emerge into the main caverns to find the remaining crew healthy and well-maintained. William greets you with relief evident on his weathered face. The cavern settlement has thrived in your absence, the remaining crew adapting to their smaller numbers, maintaining order and routine, surviving winter exactly as planned. Together again, the full crew prepares for the final journey south. Now with guides and support, even the weakest members can make the passage safely. The party moves slowly, carefully, ensuring everyone completes each day's travel before resting. 10 days after your return to the caverns, the entire crew of the Aurora Borealis emerges into the valley, reunited, alive, successful in their survival through the harshest winter any have experienced. The ship herself is abandoned to the ice, perhaps to be released in spring, perhaps to be crushed and lost. But the crew survived, and more than that, they discovered knowledge worth preserving. The cavern network, the ancient routes, the Thule people's wisdom encoded in stone all represent discoveries that will benefit future Arctic travelers. In the years following your winter in the ice, you and other crew members share the story widely, documenting the cavern network, translating more of the guidestones, ensuring the knowledge is preserved and distributed. Thomas writes extensively about the warm chamber and other features, creating guides for future expeditions. William lectures to geographic societies about the experience, emphasizing the lessons learned about survival, cooperation, and adaptation. You return to navigation, working on ships that sail northern waters, but you carry with you forever the memory of that winter, of the months spent underground, of the ancient knowledge that saved your lives. You understand now that survival in extreme conditions requires more than strength or courage. It requires humility to learn from those who came before, wisdom to adapt their knowledge to present circumstances, and cooperation to accomplish together what no individual could achieve alone. The Aurora Borealis may have been trapped in ice, but what you discovered below the frozen surface proved more valuable than any cargo the ship could have carried. You found warmth in the coldest place on Earth. You found shelter in ancient knowledge. You found that human beings across centuries and cultures share the same essential wisdom about surviving when survival seems impossible. Winter taught you that ice can be more than a prison. It can be a doorway to hidden worlds, to knowledge preserved in darkness, to understanding that warmth exists even in the coldest places if you know where to look and how to recognize it. The ship may be lost, but the crew endures, and the knowledge discovered beneath the ice now serves travelers who will never know your names but will benefit from your experience. That is the legacy of the Aurora Borealis and her crew. Not just survival, but the preservation and transmission of knowledge that makes future survival more likely for others facing similar extremes. When the ship got trapped in ice, you discovered what was hidden below, and in discovering it, you added your own chapter to the long story of human adaptation to Earth's harshest environments. If you found meaning in this story of survival, ancient wisdom, and the warmth that exists beneath even the coldest surface, please subscribe to our channel for more tales of human resilience in extreme conditions. Each story we share honors the courage of those who faced impossible odds and found ways to endure. Thank you for listening, and may you always find warmth, whether it rises from deep earth or from the companionship of those who journey beside you through difficult times.